Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this Friday's Wellbeing Face Live. My name's Simi. I am the founder of Wellbeing Face, a thriving coaching and consulting psychology practice. We focus on working with leaders globally to really help foster well-being, inclusion, and productivity. I've got my fabulous guest that I'm super excited to introduce to you today. Welcome, Suganda Bagava Chapman. Welcome to today's show. It's
Hello.
great to have you. And welcome to all of you that have joined to watch today's show on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. We are streaming live. I hope you're all doing very, very well today. And for those of you that watch the replay, welcome to yourselves as well. So today we've got a really exciting topic that is very close to my heart personally and professionally. And I've been working with a lot of leaders and organizations to help drive and foster inclusive environments and equipping leaders to really cultivate a culture where people not only feel that they're doing great work, but they really feel a strong sense of belonging to their organization as well. And we know with the research that higher level of belonging, a sense of real belonging, really promotes things like happiness, engagement, creativity, innovation, and the psychological safety to feel safe that you can really bring out the best in yourself, even if it means stepping out of your comfort zone and doing something a bit risky. So today we've got a really great topic and conversation because Suganda and I are going to be talking about Brene Brown's research, but in terms of what it means for us as the brown girl. And we'll be sharing some examples, we'll be looking at research, we'll be talking about particular terms such as intersectionality and what that really means, because the clearer we are on these terms, the more relevant impact we can start to have, and we can start to really collectively move the dial. But before we launch into the topic, let me give a really warm welcome to Suganda. Suganda, it's really great to have you here, and I really want to introduce you because you've done some fantastic work in this area. So by way of introduction, Suganda is a multi-passionate entrepreneur, consultant, storyteller, and women's leadership and business strategist with a hope and a dream for a more just and equitable world. I can really resonate with that as well, Suganda, especially for women and children. Currently, she's combining her experience from almost a decade in the corporate world and the NFP sector to run her own leadership coaching and consulting business, Greater Good Corporation, working with organizations globally to drive their diversity and inclusion initiatives through a focus on gender equity in the STEM industry. Beyond her love of supporting transformation of leaders and organizations is a personal passion, and this is social justice, diversity, and inclusion. And she has been involved in various platforms to challenge existing systems to advance social impact through good business and creating communities where every story is told and listened to. So a big warm welcome, Suganda. You've got a lot of experience in this space. You and I have already had several chats and discussions, and I know it's a topic that we can both talk about for a long, long time. But today I really want to bring your expertise and experience to the light. And I think it'd be really great to start with understanding what we first and foremost mean by the term intersectionality, because if we understand this term, we can really take a deeper lens and look into inclusion.
Yeah, thank you, Simi, and thanks so much for having me here. It's like sometimes when you hear that very LinkedIn bio, you're kind of like, ooh, I sound good, right? No, it's nice to be here, and I'm really excited to talk to you about this particular topic. And diversity and inclusion, when we think about it as a concept, it's quite broad, and there are so many layers and facets of it as well. And this concept of intersectionality is quite a foundational piece to talking about diversity and inclusion. And for those that might be not familiar with that term, or even, for those who are, essentially it was a term that was coined, quite a while back, I think back in 1989 by Professor Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. And essentially what it is, it's a term that really describes how, these characteristics of race, class, gender, and other individual characteristics, how they sort of overlap and intersect. And how these different, intersecting identities, how that actually enables us as human beings to encounter the world, and how people experience us as well. And so what it means is that these, we as human beings are quite complex, layered people, that the intersection of these identities, whether, we have these identities that may be considered to be more, socially accepted or more dominant in society today, and those that might be parts of us which, are considered to be a little bit more underrepresented, how they intersect and how do we actually experience this world. And then the nuances and the layers of this complexity means that when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we need to be thinking about intersectionality, because not one, demographic of diversity and inclusion is homogenous. We have these intersecting and overlapping layers of our identities that allows us to be able to, what I would say, experience the world, and to have different lived experiences of, the workplace, the home, and society in general as well.
Thank you, Sugandha, for that really wonderful explanation of intersectionality, because it is complex when we start to look at the multiple layers of potential, well, it is of identity, it is multiple layers of identity, but also then the potential discrimination that can be experienced by those with multiple forms of multiple identities. So, for example, I'm an Indian female, very much underrepresented in the business corporate world if we look at very senior level roles. And I think if we look at intersectionality by really understanding where those identities cross over, and then what the unique experience is for that individual, it may not be the same for others, but each and every experience is a unique experience, and it's a valid experience. So really helpful explanation. Thank you so much. What I want to ask you then is, if we think back to Brene Brown's work around vulnerability. So, Brene Brown really encourages us to be, benefits of being vulnerable and showing up as a vulnerable leader when the time is required, and the benefits of showing that vulnerability. But I want to just turn that back a little bit to open up a discussion. What if you're in the minority and you are the Indian female leader? How acceptable, how appropriate is it then to be vulnerable? And before we launch into the response of that, I just want to understand, what do we define as vulnerability? In your words, how do you define vulnerability?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, so many layers, and probably could have talk about this all day. And for me, when I'm thinking about vulnerability, it is about, what I would say, it's about authenticity at the same time. And it's really interesting that when we're talking about authenticity, that word is probably more recognized and more widely used than vulnerability. But for me, they feel like the sort of two sides of the same coin, in the sense that you cannot be authentic without being vulnerable. And so when we're thinking about leadership, particularly when we're thinking about the way leadership is evolving, this concept of authentic leadership as well, it really is about, we hear this all the time, bring your whole self to work, right? Allow yourself to be brave and vulnerable and authentic in order to be able to connect and to lead in a way that is true to you. And I absolutely agree in the sense of being an authentic leader, because it's exhausting being someone you're not, right? But
Yeah.
at the same time, it takes a ton of courage to be authentic, and which means, being vulnerable, letting some of those guards down. And so when you are in a identity, or you have a lived experience of intersecting identities, and you talk about being an Indian female. I mean, same for me. When I think about the identities that I hold, that some of them, like I was saying, I guess more widely accepted and more dominant in society here, and some identities of myself that I don't even think about, but for others might be something that are part of their lived experience. So for me, I'm a woman, and I'm a woman of color. I'm a mother. I'm a leader. And very recently, probably quite, I would say, very much on the verge of being formally recognized as being not neurodiverse. So, and that's something that I'm still starting to unpack as well. So these parts of me, how does that actually mean when I show up? And so when we're thinking about Brene Brown's work around vulnerability, and that, there's been a lot of mixed reactions to that as well. And when it came out, I was like, yes, absolutely. This concept of authentic leadership is exactly what we need. And then, I think it was back in December 2021, Dr. Kerry Yazid wrote a viral post, which was essentially looking at very critically at Brene Brown's work to go, is Brene Brown's research on vulnerability, and by that matter, authenticity, is it for people that are not in that dominant identity? Is it for the Black people? Is it for the women of color? Is it for those that are neurodiverse, LGBTIQ, that may be having identities that are not in those that are part of what we call society's norms? And so it's really interesting because, a lot of people came to the defense of her, of Brene Brown, and to really criticize Dr. Carey as well, to really think about, actually, no, she's allowing us to take away some of those guardrails. And so it's a very nuanced conversation. And what I say for that is that, when we're thinking about vulnerability and authenticity, like I said, it takes a lot of courage, right? It takes a lot of courage for us to even be authentic, to show all of our weirdness, all of the different parts of us, to the people where we may still be trying to see whether we fit in, whether this is a culture that actually accepts that as well. So for those that have identities, women of color, LGBTIQ, neurodiverse, those living with disability, First Nations people as well, where historically the systems and the structures have not been built and made for them, and these concepts of authenticity and vulnerability are really there to protect and advocate for those who have systemic and positional power. The cost of courage is high, right?
Yeah.
It takes a lot of courage, and the cost of courage is high.
Yeah.
So when you're thinking about being courageous, and if I had an environment where I go, okay, you know what, I've got ADHD, right? I can't say that, and I'm not going to say that, because if I'm not feeling like the environment in which I am in allows me to embrace that part of me, I don't actually know what the backlash is going to be on me for me being able to share that part of me. So that vulnerability part, I don't share that. Well, okay, I've just shared it with everyone on LinkedIn now, so there you go. Slightly different. But if I'm in a workplace, right,
Yeah.
where I have probably a little bit more on the line in terms of my career prospects and my career journey, and thinking about the impact that this has. I'm not going to share those parts of me that stray far away from that culture of that organization or what society's norms are, if I know that the cost of that is going to be too high. So it's well and easy for us to say, be vulnerable, right? To look at Brene Brown's work and say, be vulnerable. For a lot of brown women, a lot of people of color, a lot of people with those underrepresented identities and intersections of these identities, it's not easy. It isn't easy. That's where that criticism really comes in. It's like, I don't think this work actually takes into the account of the lived experiences and the very real realities of the backlash that can occur when we try and be vulnerable, when we try and be courageous, when we try and step up. Because often what happens is we start to talk about our lived experiences and people say, why do you hate us?
Yeah.
Why do you hate us so much? And it's like, no, I'm just sharing that this is my lived experience here. It's not an us versus you. If you want me to be vulnerable and actually tell you that this is what it feels like to be a woman of color in leadership today, and you're not listening, why would I do that again? Right?
True. I think you really raised some great points there, Suganda. One is in particular the person who is, is thinking about being vulnerable. They need to feel comfortable that their vulnerability will not be abused. It won't backfire on them. It's going to be used. It's going to be heard and listened to and embraced. But at the same time, then leaders also then need to be able to, one, encourage and demonstrate those behaviours that they're there to truly listen, to support. And only when they've built that trust can they then expect individuals to open up and bring their whole selves. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. Why would it happen? Because you're putting yourself at risk in a way. You're putting yourself out there for judgment, for being misunderstood, for being, thought of unfavorably. Why would we do that?
Yeah.
And I think the other point to really note here is that I think, when we look at Brene Brown's work, to her point, vulnerability isn't really just about emotionally expressing yourself or, talking, sharing how you're emotionally feeling. It's also can be displayed in different ways in terms of us being really curious, not to have all of the answers, and to put your hand up to say, well, actually, I need to know a little bit more here. Let me get curious and ask you some questions. And again, though, if you're coming from a place of being a minority and having multiple identities that intersect, you do become a little bit more reluctant to put yourself even in that place of curiosity, because you may be judged as, oh, well, she doesn't know. She doesn't know. She should know by now. Or it could even be played back that you're acting or you're behaving in line with the stereotypical Indian female, quiet, submissive, reserved. If you didn't know the answer, or you had these questions, why didn't you raise them earlier?
Yeah, it's really interesting because some of the criticism, I guess, around intersectionality is that people feel like it's another label that we're putting on ourselves of how how oppressed am I? I am this, and this, therefore I've got it harder than you. And I want to reframe that to say, actually, no, it's about really understanding that these parts of us, that these characteristics of us as human beings are so nuanced, and that it's one, our lived experiences, but how do we actually relate to other people as well, especially as they start to move further away from those identities that are considered societal norms, because that gets even more complicated when it comes to thinking about it. And so when we're thinking about, the vulnerability of being curious, and I would encourage our organizations to take that concept of vulnerability onto them. And this is what we see in a lot of the work that I do in the D&I consulting space, is that we've got organizations that are ready, or they're on the verge of wanting to really understand how to have these conversations or to foster an environment. Because when we talked about that safety, right, psychological safety is the foundation of diversity and inclusion. And we know how important that is for not only us as human beings, as employees, as leaders within the workplace, but how does that actually foster an environment that allows us to be our best, to actually think about performing? Because for those where there is a high cost of actually being authentic or vulnerable, it's not just about being looked unfavorably. It can be very real costs of being overlooked for promotions. It can be a very real cost of, actually being reprimanded or ostracized as well, because you've dared to speak out of what is considered to be the culture or the norm in that sense. And so a lot of us, and this is a term that maybe some of you might have heard of, especially, is you get very used to code switching, which is, to fit in, right? And, being a daughter of immigrants, I was brought up with that, I guess, mindset of put your head down, work hard, and your hard work will get noticed. Don't make waves, don't stand up. And if you focus on your education, of course, you're going to get noticed. You're going to go far that way. Because the moment that you start to speak up and move out of that model minority, a myth there is, or the view or the stereotypes that people have of you as a particular identity, that is when you're actually risking a lot. And that's where a lot of the backlash can actually happen there too. And so it's when you start to move away from that status quo or those norms as well. And it's I think that, when we think about these things and being vulnerable, it's to really maybe come back to understand we're not going to get everything. We can never fully experience how somebody else is living or what they've gone through or what they are going through at this stage. But what we can do is really think about how do we foster a environment that allows us to have a space where this can be talked about, where it can be brought out of the open, which is what Brene Brown's work is about. It's like, shame and vulnerability. It's about, rather than keeping it in the dark, it's actually bringing it out in the open. And so you can't create that, or you can't put that all on the people that are trying to, I guess, rise up or to survive within the systems. It's really about those systems actually taking on some of that work as well and creating an environment to dismantle these systems of, I would say, oppression and systemic power, in that sense, that creates this environment where this safety is not there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think, if we look at privilege, people in positions of privilege that have that power and influence, it's helping them to really understand that it's also their responsibility and accountability to support, to develop, to give others of minority that are, can be given the platform to shine, to thrive. And I know you do a lot of work around allyship. And, if we just talk about that briefly, because we'll be running a separate live purely on allyship, because it's such an important way in which leaders in an organization really foster and play their key role in supporting more minority groups and individuals to really thrive and shine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the conversation that we're having around allyship, again, is multi-layered as well. And in the work that I do, it is, focused on how can men be allies to women in the workplace. But the concepts of allyship can be extended to anyone, honestly. So anyone that has a position of privilege can be an ally to those that are underrepresented. And so when we do this work, it's really about, like what you said, like part of allyship is knowing when to speak up, but also knowing when to be quiet and passing the mic. It is about using some of that positional privilege to give opportunities to those that may not have been selected or, actually given the opportunity to do this, and to really ask yourself, is this something that is really required for me as someone, as a person of privilege that is going to move my career forward, or can this actually be given to someone else? Will there be another opportunity for me as well? And the biggest thing about allyship as well, like a lot of us think we are allies for people of underrepresented identities. And what I would say here is it's about active allyship and almost to the advocacy and activist kind of position, if we can take, because we want to move from intention to actual action. And this is when we think about organizations that are looking at being inclusive, it's about being allies to your employees, to these intersectional identities, and through action, through accountability, through policies, through procedures, through culture, what can we actually do to move from, hey, yeah, we're great, we love gender equality, but what are we doing about it?
What are we really doing about it?
What is the language we're using? How are we calling others in for conversations that we no longer tolerate? How are we actually fixing the policies and procedures to allow for flexible working and parental leave, and for both genders or for all identities? How are we creating in a culture of psychological safety and inclusion? So the action part is really, really important when we're thinking about allyship. It's not just about intent, because intent doesn't trump impact.
Right? True. It's the actions that are going to make the real difference. Ruchika Tulashan, her work around this area is really powerful. She's recently published a book on inclusion on purpose. I would definitely recommend that to everyone that's really sincerely interested in this topic and also looking for practical and tactical ways to move the dial individually and collectively as an organization. She looks at it from that individual lens, but also the systems and the processes that organizations can put into place. So I definitely would recommend her book and her fabulous work and insights in this area as well. And I just want to share, Sukanda, that this is really important work, because at the end of the day, if we are really looking to see more minorities, whether it be females from ethnic minority backgrounds, really progressing in organizations. If we look at Australia, the stats and the figures are really actually quite damning when we look at the number of ethnic minority females in senior positions. And it is really upsetting, actually, because it's not that these women out there haven't got the potential, they haven't got the the capability to do it. They absolutely have, but it is a question around accessibility and opportunity. And I'm really looking forward to doing the live with you. It will be on the 17th of June when we look at allyship, because this is a very practical, active role. It's not about being a bystander here. It's about being an active supporter. And what does that really look like? And to set that role up and also that program up for success in your organization.
Yes, I'm excited. I think it's a great conversation to have, because a lot of people ask, they what we call ally curious, right? It's like, I want to be an ally. How do I actually go about doing this? Like, what are the things? And then people also recognize and realize that they are doing some things. They might just need to amplify what they're doing, or to share it and almost role model it for others as well. Because we do find that when these behaviors become especially we see them through our colleagues and our peers, more so from our leaders, we take more notice, and it's more impactful that way as well. So we can start to change culture that way by actually being role models, or to role modeling that behavior to our peers and our teams as leaders as well. So looking forward to that conversation a little bit later too.
Fantastic, Sukanda. So wow, look, that's our 30 minutes of our live. How quick does the time go? It's been really wonderful to have you here today, and thank you for all of you that have tuned in to listen. Sharon, I really want to give you a big shout out today. You've supported Wellbeing Face's journey throughout, and really value your comments and contributions as well. Absolutely, you're so right. Trust does need to be built first. Psychological safety is the foundation piece to really foster inclusion. Without psychological safety, it's really hard. It's like with any relationship, if we're wanting to really develop deeper, meaningful relationships, trust has got to be there. If it doesn't, everything else is just on this rocky, collapsible, non-existing foundation. So thank you, Sharon. And also, I'm really pleased that you've shared the TED Talk. It's a really good TED Talk, actually, Kimberly Crenshaw's TED Talk on intersectionality. And she, although it's mainly focused on Black women and the Black minority, is really interesting in terms of how she tells that story. Really powerful. So I'd encourage many of you to watch the TED Talk. So thank you for all of you that have joined. Just to also let you know, I am running a series of psychology of inclusion topics, the topic psychology of inclusion, but posts and videos on LinkedIn over the course of the next few weeks. I'm really looking to share psychological insights to really help people unpack this term, because there's so much this term around inclusion, but there's so much benefit that when we get it right, it's a win-win situation. And what's amazing about this particular area is lives become better. It's not just organizations' profits, but lives become better. And for me, that is so very fulfilling, very purposeful. So please tune in, connect with myself and Sugandha on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to us with any of your questions, feedback, comments. We'd love to hear from you. Wishing you all a wonderful weekend ahead. Look forward to seeing you all next week. We've got a new topic that we'll be sharing with you next week, so keep a lookout for that. Sugandha will be joining me back on the live on the 17th of June. Mark that in your calendar, because we'll be talking about the really important practical topic of allyship. So thank you, Sugandha, once again. Wish you all very well, and we'll tune in next Friday, same time.
Perfect. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Thank you, Sugandha.